Have you ever noticed how lonely it can feel when you truly start to be yourself, when you finally decide to embrace the person God created you to be? Something strange often happens. You begin to feel as if you're walking this journey alone, almost as though, the more you step into your calling, the more distant people become. Suddenly, friends you once had no longer relate to you, and the support you thought would always be there seems to vanish. It can feel as though the world is watching from afar, but no one is walking beside you. Why is that? The truth is, whenever you dare to be different, to pursue the unique purpose God has placed within your heart, loneliness often shows up as a companion. C.S. Lewis once said, "The real problem is not why some pious, humble, believing people suffer, but why some do not." This resonates with the challenges we face when we follow God's plan for us. It's often a lonely, difficult road. Whether you're chasing a career that sets you apart, starting a new ministry, or simply choosing to follow God when those around you do not, loneliness can feel like an inevitable side effect of living a life dedicated to God. Today, I want to speak to those who feel like they've been walking a solitary path. Perhaps you've recently made a big decision, or you've stepped into a calling that feels larger than you, and as a result, you've noticed the crowd around you beginning to thin. The good news is that this loneliness isn't a curse, it's part of God's process to refine and prepare you for greatness. Let's uncover the surprising truth about the loneliness of the chosen ones, a truth that no one often talks about. We'll explore why this loneliness happens, the purpose it serves, and how you can learn to embrace it. One of the primary reasons loneliness comes is that when God calls you, He gives you a unique vision. He places something in your heart that only you can see and only you can accomplish. This distinct purpose sets you apart from the crowd, and often, those around you won't understand. This can create a deep sense of isolation, but it is not without reason. C.s. Lewis wrote, "Now I know, O Lord, why you utter no answer. You are yourself the answer." This reflects the reality that the path God gives us is often misunderstood by others, for it is a deeply personal calling that only He and we can fully grasp. Think about the story of Joseph in the Bible. God gave him dreams of leadership, visions where he would one day stand above his brothers and even his parents. But those dreams set him apart, leading to isolation and misunderstanding. The very people who should have supported him didn't understand his purpose and even rejected him. In the end, however, Joseph's loneliness was part of God's plan to prepare him for the greatness that lay ahead. His journey, though solitary, was a refining process. If you feel the weight of loneliness on your journey, remember that it might just be God's way of drawing you closer to Him and refining you for the purpose He's placed within you. Have you ever felt that sharp sense of loneliness creeping in just as you begin to be true to yourself? The moment you start embracing who God created you to be, something unexpected often happens. You feel as if you're walking a path alone, and, strangely, the more you pursue your calling, the further people drift away. Those close friends who once understood you seem distant now, and the support you once thought would always be there is suddenly gone. It can feel like you're surrounded by silent onlookers, watching from a distance, yet no one walks beside you. Why does this happen? The reality is, when you decide to be different, to follow the unique purpose God has set in your heart, loneliness often appears as an uninvited companion. C.s. Lewis once remarked, "The real problem is not why some pious, humble, believing people suffer, but why some do not." His words resonate deeply with the challenges we face when we strive to live out God's plan. It is rarely easy and often lonely. Whether you're pursuing a career that sets you apart, launching a new ministry, or even making a simple choice to follow God when those around you don't, loneliness can feel like a natural, if painful, outcome of living a life set apart. Today, I want to reach out to those who feel they're walking alone. Maybe you've recently made a significant decision, or you've taken a step into a calling that feels overwhelmingly big, and you notice the crowd around you beginning to thin. The positive side to this solitude is that it isn't a curse. In fact, it's often part of God's process to refine and ready you for greatness. Let's dive into the often ignored truth about the loneliness of those chosen by God. Why does this loneliness occur? What purpose does it serve? And how can you learn to embrace it? One of the fundamental reasons for this loneliness is that when God calls you, He provides you with a unique vision. He places something in your heart that only you can see and only you are equipped to fulfill. This distinctive purpose sets you apart from others, and naturally, those around you may not understand. This misunderstanding can breed a deep sense of isolation, but it serves a greater purpose. C.s. Lewis wrote, "Now I know, O Lord, why you utter no answer. You are yourself the answer." This reflects the fact that the journey God calls us to walk is intensely personal, often beyond what others can fully understand. Consider Joseph's story in the Bible. God gave him dreams of leadership, dreams where he would stand above his brothers and even his parents. These dreams separated him, leading to rejection and misunderstanding from those closest to him. In the end, though, Joseph's loneliness was part of God's plan, a path designed to prepare him for the greatness that lay ahead. His journey, though solitary, served as a refining process. If you find yourself weighed down by loneliness on your journey, remember it may just be God's way of drawing you closer to Him, preparing you for the purpose He's embedded within your heart. Embrace this solitude, for it could be the very tool God uses to refine and ready you for His unique calling. Imagine yourself as an athlete training for the Olympics. While your friends enjoy their weekends, indulging in whatever they want and relaxing, you're up early every morning, following a strict training regimen, adhering to a disciplined diet, and pushing yourself relentlessly toward your goal. You can't afford to live like everyone else because your calling is different. You're striving for something higher, something that requires sacrifice. C.s. Lewis once observed, "To love at all is to be vulnerable." The sacrifices you make in pursuit of your calling make you vulnerable to loneliness, yet this vulnerability is a necessary step toward greatness. This truth also holds in our spiritual lives. When you choose to live a life marked by integrity, faith, and obedience to God, it often sets you apart from others. The world doesn't always value these traits. In fact, people might even mock or distance themselves from you because they don't share your commitment. But, like the Olympic athlete, you understand that the reward is worth the sacrifice. Think of Moses as an example. God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, a daunting task. Moses faced resistance not only from Pharaoh, but also from the very people he was trying to help. He had to lead a nation through the wilderness, dealing with complaints and constant rebellion. Yet, despite the challenges, Moses remained faithful to the high standards God set for him. His loneliness wasn't a sign of failure, it was a mark of his leadership. In our modern context, you may find yourself in a similar situation. Perhaps you're a young person committed to living a pure life in a culture that promotes the opposite, or maybe you're a business leader who refuses to cut ethical corners, even when it costs you financially. Holding high standards can make you feel isolated, but remember that these standards are what set you apart on the path to greatness. As C.s. Lewis said, integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. Often, in this unseen commitment to our values, loneliness may grow, but it's also where character is forged. Jesus himself exemplified this. He lived a perfect life, always holding himself to the highest standards, even if it meant standing alone. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as he faced the cross, he was abandoned by his closest friends. Yet, in that moment of loneliness, he surrendered fully to God's will. His solitude was not a weakness, it was a testament to his strength and commitment. So, if you feel isolated on your journey, remember that this loneliness might just be part of the refining process, preparing you for something greater. Like the Olympian, Moses, and Jesus, your solitude can be a sign of your dedication to a higher calling. Embrace it, for it is shaping you into the person God has called you to be. Loneliness often precedes the most profound acts of love the world has ever known. If you're feeling the weight of responsibility and the isolation that comes with it, take heart. God has called you to a higher standard for a reason. Your faithfulness in these lonely moments is preparing you for the impact you are destined to make. This leads us to an important truth: solitude is essential for revelation and growth. Throughout the Bible, we see that God frequently leads people into seasons of isolation before revealing His grand plans for their lives. These times of solitude aren't punishments but are meant as preparation. Think about Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness. Before beginning his public ministry, the Holy Spirit led him into the desert, where he fasted and prayed alone. It was during this period of isolation that Jesus overcame temptation and readied himself for the mission ahead. This steadfast phase was not wasted, it was crucial for his maturity and readiness for what was to come. C.s. Lewis reflected on this aspect in A Grief Observed, writing, "We were promised sufferings. They were part of the program. We were even told, 'Blessed are they that mourn,' and I accept it." Many of us, similarly, are called into seasons of loneliness so that God can do a deep work within us. In these quiet, set-apart moments, free from distractions, we can hear God's voice more clearly. It is within solitude that we grow, receiving the revelations we need for the next stage of our journey. Consider someone starting a new business. They often spend long, solitary hours working late at night, while others are asleep, struggling with self-doubt and feeling as though no one else understands their vision. Yet it's precisely in these quiet hours, away from the noise, that ideas are born, plans take shape, and breakthroughs happen. This is also true for our spiritual lives. Solitude is where God refines us, shapes us, and prepares us for the tasks ahead. We live in a culture that values busyness and constant connection. We are surrounded by instant messages, social media, and a never-ending stream of information. Yet often, it's when we disconnect from the noise that we hear God most clearly. In the stillness of solitude, we are reminded of who we are and what we are called to do. C.s. Lewis understood the importance of stepping away from the chaos, as he once wrote about that moment of awakening each morning when all your wishes and hopes for the day rush at you like wild animals. It is in these moments of solitude that we gain clarity and strength, where God grounds us in purpose and equips us for the calling ahead. So, embrace these seasons of loneliness, for they may be the very places where God prepares you for greatness. The first task each morning is simply to push back all the noise and listen for that other voice, the one that gives you a different perspective, allowing a greater, stronger, quieter life to flow in. Consider the example of the Apostle Paul. After his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, he didn't immediately step into ministry. Instead, he spent time in the desert, alone with God, before embracing his role as one of the greatest apostles. That period of isolation was critical for his growth and preparation. If you find yourself in a season of loneliness now, know that it's not wasted. God is using this time to develop you, to grant you revelation, and to prepare you for the next step. Don't rush the process, embrace the solitude, knowing that God is working in the quiet places of your life. One of the hardest parts of being called by God is facing misunderstanding and rejection. As you walk in your calling, there will be times when people don't understand. They may reject you, criticize you, or even oppose you simply because they can't grasp the vision God has given you. This isn't a new struggle. Even Jesus himself was rejected by the very people he came to save. He was misunderstood by the religious leaders of his time, and at times, even by his own disciples. But he didn't let that stop him from fulfilling his mission. In fact, he used those moments of rejection to draw closer to the Father and focus on his purpose. C.s. Lewis captured this sentiment in The Problem of Pain, writing, "Pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." The world's rejection often brings us closer to God. In our modern world, rejection can appear in many forms. Maybe you've been criticized for pursuing a dream others see as unrealistic, or perhaps you've faced opposition for standing up for what you believe in. It's easy to feel discouraged when people reject you, especially when it comes from those closest to you. But remember, rejection is often a sign that you're on the right path. Consider a practical example. Someone decides to leave a high-paying corporate job to follow a calling into ministry or to start a nonprofit. The world may see this as foolish. Friends and family may question the decision, offering countless logical reasons why it doesn't make sense. But deep down, that person knows that this is what God is calling them to do. The rejection and misunderstanding they face are painful, but they're also indicators that they're stepping into something greater than themselves. Joseph's story mirrors this too. His dreams set him apart, leading to rejection by his brothers. Yet, those dreams were part of God's bigger plan. So, if you feel isolated or misunderstood, know that you're not alone. God is preparing you for a purpose beyond what others may see or understand. Embrace the quiet, endure the rejection, and trust that you're being led toward something profoundly meaningful. As mentioned earlier, Joseph faced misunderstanding and rejection from his own brothers, but that rejection was part of God's plan to position him for influence in Egypt. What looked like rejection was actually God's redirection. So, if you're experiencing rejection right now, don't be discouraged. It's part of the journey, a season God often allows to strengthen our resolve and deepen our dependence on Him. When others reject you, it's an opportunity to draw closer to God and trust Him more fully with your future. The path to fulfilling God's calling often requires significant sacrifice. And sacrifice, by its nature, can be lonely. When God calls you to something greater, He often asks you to let go of things others may cling to: comfort, relationships, or even personal dreams. Abraham exemplifies this. God called him to leave his homeland, his family, and everything he knew to go to a land that God would show him. This journey must have felt incredibly lonely at times. Abraham had to trust God even when it made no sense. He had to sacrifice his comfort and familiarity to step into the unknown. In today's world, this might look like someone feeling called to move to a new country for missionary work, leaving behind family, friends, and the life they've always known. It could be someone sacrificing their time and energy to serve in ministry, missing out on social events or career advancement because they're committed to a higher purpose. These sacrifices can feel isolating because not everyone will understand why you're making them. But here's the truth: every sacrifice you make for God is never in vain. Jesus said in Matthew 19 verse 29, "And everyone who has left houses, or brothers, or sisters, or father or mother, or children or lands, for my name's sake, will receive 100-fold and will inherit eternal life." God sees every sacrifice, and He promises that what you give up for His sake will be repaid. The loneliness that accompanies sacrifice is temporary, but the reward is eternal. If you're feeling the weight of sacrifice right now, know that God is with you. He understands your struggles, and He's walking alongside you through it. Your sacrifices are a crucial part of your journey to fulfilling your purpose. Remember that these moments of letting go and trusting are refining you for the work ahead. Just as God's redirection transformed Joseph's rejection into a place of leadership, your sacrifices are setting the stage for a life of deeper purpose and eternal reward. So, embrace this season of sacrifice. Lean into the solitude, and let it draw you closer to God, knowing that your sacrifices, no matter how challenging, are preparing you for something greater than you could imagine. God is at work in your loneliness, using it to build your faith and shape your future, and He promises that the journey, though difficult, will be worth it in the end. One of the final reasons that those who are called often experience loneliness is due to the testing of their faith and patience. When God gives you a vision or calling, it doesn't always come to fruition immediately. There are often long periods of waiting, filled with uncertainty and challenges that can feel incredibly lonely. Think of David, anointed as king while still a young shepherd, yet he had to wait years before actually sitting on the throne. During that time, he faced persecution, lived in caves, and was constantly on the run from King Saul. It must have been a lonely and confusing season for him, knowing what God had promised but facing a waiting period that tested his faith and patience. In our own lives, we often face similar seasons of waiting. Maybe God has given you a vision of something He wants to bring into your life, but it feels like it's taking forever to happen. You've prayed, worked, and trusted, but the breakthrough still hasn't come. In those moments, it's easy to feel alone, as if God has forgotten you or that your calling may never be fulfilled. But it's crucial to remember that waiting is part of the process. God uses these seasons to strengthen our faith and teach us patience. He is not delaying His promises, He is preparing you through them. During these lonely times, God is building your character and refining you for the next step. The Apostle Paul, after his conversion, spent years in preparation before stepping into his full calling as a missionary. Those years of waiting weren't wasted, they were a time of growth and development, equipping him for the incredible ministry he would later have. If you find yourself in a waiting season right now, don't be discouraged. God is with you in the waiting. He is working behind the scenes, even when you can't see it. Your loneliness in this time isn't a sign of abandonment, but rather a sign of preparation. The surprising truth about loneliness is that it's not a punishment, it's part of God's process for you. The loneliness of those chosen by God isn't a sign of rejection or failure, but of being set apart. God is using your solitude to shape you, mold you, and prepare you for the greatness He has planned. Today, if you feel alone, remember you're in good company. Moses, Joseph, David, Jesus all walked lonely paths, yet those paths led to incredible influence and impact. Your loneliness isn't the end of your story, it's simply part of the journey to where God is leading you. So embrace your solitude, trusting that God is working in these quiet, lonely moments. He is preparing you for something extraordinary. You are not truly alone, God walks with you every step of the way. As c.s.Lewis said, "Courage, dear heart." Let that courage carry you through these seasons of loneliness toward the extraordinary purpose God has prepared for you.